Hey everyone, it's Ben Graining for Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Today, Robert will not be joining us, at least not from a video point of view. Um, he may get in here through the chat, but there's a power outage, so he just can't come on. So I decided to go ahead as a solo, a bit of a monologue. Hopefully, I'll get a few people commenting on to the comments and further this conversation a little bit. What I want to talk a little bit is winter camping. Last weekend, I managed to get out winter camping with a couple of good friends, Sean and Chris. Sean's from Old Bastard Outdoors. Had a great trip, I must say. We had really enjoyed ourselves doing some winter camping, and I really got to thinking because we were out walking. Um, I won't get too much into how much walking or exactly where, but as we were out walking, we actually ran into quite a few people because we were fairly close to Halifax, and walking around and with our gear and stuff, people stopped and talked to us. People very interested in winter camping. A lot of people showing interest and wanting to know quite a bit more about it. Like, what do they need? Is it really expensive? And that's something that I've always thought of it as like, how is it really as expensive as people think? And it really, I don't think it is. I've often made the comparison that if you look at a lot of people's hobbies, take hockey or motorcycle, any of these other sports, yes, they're expensive. They can be very expensive. But honestly, if you really add them all up and look into the things like different sports trips you might have to take, equipment you need to buy, and you add it all up, camping isn't horribly out of whack. And a few things you do tend to want to buy are usually stuff that you can use for weeks, years, years. And oftentimes when you're finished using it, you can really share it with your friends and you can sell it, and it's still in really good shape. Examples of this are really good tents or wood stoves if you want to take them, cooking utensils and stoves. A lot of this stuff lasts virtually forever. It doesn't really wear out, doesn't really break if you take care of it. So I would argue that it's not really expensive. So what do you need to get out? And that varies a lot depending on the person. But I think to start to really bring it out is you need some fairly basic things. Generally, you want some kind of shelter. I think that's one of the most important things. This was even a topic of conversation we had, like, what is the most important thing? And I think, the general consensus I had with my friends was a shelter would be the first thing all of us would build. Because regardless of everything else, if you can get 90% of the weather off of you, the wind, the rain, the snow, if you can keep that off of you, you're that much better. I mean, a fire, a lot of people say, oh, first thing you need is a fire. Well, fire is great, but a fire can be a lot of work and is only really effective while you're actively feeding it. I mean, it needs to be going. And a shelter, once you build it, it's passively doing this job for you continually. So you have a lot of choices, though, with a shelter. So with winter camping, obviously you just want to keep yourself as warm as possible and dry. So if, for instance, your material, you don't want to spend a ton of money, natural shelters where you would go. So with a natural shelter, you're talking about using tree boughs, debris, any of these type of things. Or in fact, in winter, you can use the main thing you have around, which is oftentimes snow. So you can build like a snow hut. All these things are great shelters. They really can be used to be a very enjoyable trip. And in fact, we ran into a couple of young fellas in the woods. That was their plan. And it was really interesting because if you look at the gear we went in, because we went in for winter camping, they went in winter camp. They had a lot more gear than we did because I think they took a lot of stuff to build the shelter and to be prepared. And we had some slightly more compact gear within our kits. So that sort of shows you that it's not necessarily lighter or easier to go with a natural shelter because you're going to need more tools. If you're going in and setting up a tent, you don't need as many tools to necessarily build this shelter. You don't need the ropes. Now, with skill level, you can get these really far down, but it's not like you can get it down to nothing. Um, so what I would really push, I would really encourage people would be to get out and practice with these things before they try them. And they're very easy. I mean, I think most of us have built a snow shelter growing up, even if you've never built a debris shelter. But once you build them, you realize this is a task that's going to take time. You'll definitely want to start early. Don't wait till it's dark to start putting up a debris shelter or a snow hut, because it's going to be dark for quite a while before you fully get it finished. Hey, Robert, I see you're in there. But it is a great method. And in fact, a good debris shelter, a natural shelter, can oftentimes be a lot warmer than a man-made or bought shelter, because you're going to be able to build it thicker. A nice snow fort, like if you got 6-7 inches of snow, honestly, your body heat alone will give you a fair bit of heat within that shelter. And you can definitely get a night out of that, or a few, and be yes, and be fairly comfortable. So if you're going for the cheapest as possible, then the natural shelter may be the method. Just be aware that it is going to take a bit more time and a fair bit more effort than some of the other options. The next method that I think I would really like to kind of get into people thinking is just a simple tarp shelter. And this can be as cheap as the $5 tarp from the dollar, well, not this dollar store, but you know what I mean. Or something for Canadian Tire, Walmart, just a basic tarp, plastic tarp, and some string. You tie this up, and you got enough to keep the snow off the top of you. You can do it in sort of like an A-frame style, like down either side. You can just do a lean-to style where you got one side. Make sure that you face the wall into the wind when you're doing this. If you face it the other way, you're really not going to get a lot of great advantage here. And this is true for any shelter, just more so maybe with a lean-to type shelter. You always want to choose your location to make sure that you have the best advantages. And by that, think about, wind direction. Think about where the sun is potentially for what you're setting up. Think about all the little things. Think about how water is going to move when it hits the ground. So in winter, you never know if it's raining or snowing. Oh yes, someone mentioned it. Yes, exactly. Someone got built a snow shelter and was graduated. It saved his life, and they were very impressed by the fact that he built this shelter and kept them protected. But yeah, when you build these shelters, what I'm saying is you really want to make sure you build them well, and you build them to take the best advantage. So take a look at the natural land around you. See if that land is offering you a natural shelter to begin with, and then enhance that. Rock walls can be very useful. If you build one facing a rock wall, you really have coverage from wind from almost 360 degrees when you do that. If you can build it into denser forest, you really will get very little wind. And that's the beautiful thing when you're in the woods. If it's really, really bad, if you can go into the woods a little bit, it's always calmer. It's always a little bit better. You do have to sort of deal with maybe some snowfall and stuff like that from the tops of the trees if it's like after the snowfall, because last weekend was beautiful, but there was a ton of snow in the trees, and it was really interesting because you could just knock a tree and really cover your body with snow. But that's just me being me, right? Yes, everyone should have basic survival skills, Robert. But yeah, going on with what I'm saying is a good even a tarp shelter can make you very comfortable. And honestly, with a tarp shelter or an improvised shelter using equipment you have, you can, and a small fire, you can keep yourself extremely warm and comfortable with very little uh, else. So, I mean, that's a good method. Um, from there, we go into more man-made structures. Now, once you get into the more man-made structures like tents or more um, purpose-designed tarps, even some of those are damn near tents in themselves, set up in certain ways. What you really do is you prevent the outside environment from coming in to get to you as much, but you are limiting what you can do in other ways without having more expensive equipment. So if you're in a tent, you really can't have a fire in a tent. You have to have the fire outside. Now that changes if you get a hot tent and have a wood stove that you can take inside. In fact, that's what we had this weekend. It's a very nice system. It does make it for a very comfortable trip. And it does take some skill still to set those up and make them work well and make sure you've prepped everything ahead of time. But it is a very fun and adventurous thing to do. Do keep in mind this is going to add to your costs. A good tent stove will, if it's already pre-made, you're looking at probably $400 on average and up. Maybe you can get ones for a little bit less. But of course, the more you spend, you're going to get lighter, more compact. It's going to be easier to move. If you want less, like the stove I actually own, and I didn't use it this week, and my buddy brought his in with me, and I very much appreciated that because he had a nice lightweight titanium. I have an ammo can one. It's not horrible. It's actually not super heavy. And everything packs in it. It doesn't pack well in my bag because it is awkward shaped, and I have little things poking out of it so I can operate it. And its firebox is a bit smaller because I'm trying to keep everything unpacked. That still cost me over $100 by the time I added up the few things I bought for it. And if you want to take into the work I put into it, because I probably spent 2-3 nights cutting and grinding and adding things and welding and figuring out things before I was happy with it. And I have used a couple of different chimney systems on it. This took effort. Being cheap, it worked for me. It really did. But I'm not going to say it's the best solution for everyone. In fact, if I really thought about it and did the math, I probably would have been just as well off buying a good stove to start with. And I probably will at some point in time. But what I'm kind of getting at is that's not a necessity. The other system I wanted to talk about, and I've used this one, and I really enjoy it, and actually I really debated using the system this trip, is a hammock shelter. So that would still be your tarp, but using your hammock as your sleep system. This system works great in the winter. It really does. It keeps you off the ground, and it has some great advantages there. But with all hammocks, you do tend to get cold from the underneath. So you definitely need like an underquilt or something else to insulate you from below. That can be a foam mattress. It can be an air mattress, preferably an insulated version. It can be the reflective screens on windows, like your car window, the ones you buy at the dollar store that just open up like an accordion. Stick one of those under you. Believe it or not, it'll add a ton of warmth. Doesn't take up a ton of room. All great systems for like your sleep and slash shelter. I know the hammock is not truly a shelter. Snug pack cocoon. I have a snug pack underquilt, but that would fit in a hammock. Yes, yeah, yes, Chris. We did use cots this time, and that was a good new experience for me. The ultralight cots, those are fun too. Doesn't eliminate still having to have something insulated underneath you, but what it does do when you're sleeping in a tent, and it's one of my big problems with the tent, is ground is not necessarily flat or level. We did struggle to find a good spot to set up the tent I had because of the size and the unlevelness of the ground, and the cots definitely helped a ton with that particular system. because it gave us, it allowed us to deal with the uneven ground a bit better. So definitely a worthwhile. And for the small amount of weight and room it took in our packs, it was an enjoyable thing to take. So we've talked about the shelters, and the shelters I think are really important. And now we'll talk a bit more, and we have covered some of it, is heat. So if you're back on sort of the low tech, low cost methods, just a standard fire. It doesn't have to be huge. It should be adequate to produce the warmth you want, and really judge your fire on the wood or fuel you have. If the wood isn't great and you can get a fire going, sometimes it's easier to have a big fire. And by big fire, I don't mean it needs to be rip roaring and you have, you can't, you got to walk a few seconds to get all the way around it. Pine straw. Yes, boughs are used quite here oftentimes underneath to help work too. Yeah, see Johnny said yes. Yeah. So a good fire. I recommend a fire of probably 12 to 18 inches across is about where you're going to generally want to be. And then probably up from there in the winter. In the summer, you can get away with a smaller fire, especially if it's only for cooking. You can get away with a pretty small fire to do with cooking. But in the winter, you want to produce enough heat to really help yourself out. And with a lot of these shelters, even a tarp shelter, if it's set up well and you've got it done right, you can put the fire fairly close. And honestly, with that system alone, you don't need much more than maybe a wool blanket or just well dressed, and you can sleep through the night quite comfortably. A shelter with a nice bough bed or straw, if you can get it. There's lots of options out there. Once you build up a nice place to lay, and surprisingly, a lot of people don't know this, is the ground steals probably as much or more heat from you as the air ever would. So if you can get insulated from the ground, and that lower half of you is insulated, and then you got a fire going in front of you, you're going to be pretty warm through the night. In the winter, that's pretty enjoyable. I got to say, like, we were up quite late chatting and carrying on and shenanigans, as Chris liked to say. And it's really enjoyable just sitting by the fire in the winter. And, it's a bit quieter. It's a little bit of a different feel, and it's very enjoyable. And yeah, a nice little fire. You can be quite warm. We were in a nice sheltered area. We had a good safe spot to have our fire, so we weren't overly stressed about issues. And by issues, I mean, like, we weren't worried about the fire spreading. We weren't worried about wind coming and pushing things around. So we were able to sit there and really enjoy things because it was a good rock area that we had the fire built on. There was plenty of dead wood around that we were able to harvest and use. In fact, for that weekend, we found one dead piece of maple, one trunk, if you were. All the branches had pretty well fallen off. It was standing dead. We cut that one piece down. We had more than enough to go for a night of fire, and I bet you we could have gotten a second, if not even into a third night out of that one piece of wood. And we were quite comfortable all night. And that piece of wood probably wasn't much bigger at its biggest point than maybe 4 inches. So it does take a lot of wood inside of a small shelter. The fire we had outside, it was all like more or less, I'm not saying standing dead, but a few pieces that somebody had maybe laid up before to start a fire if they ever came back, and other pieces that we just picked up in the area. We never really had to cut anything other than that one standing dead we cut. We basically just picked up debris on the ground and kept the fire going. And it was really good. So those are the two big things, like your shelter and a fire. Anything over and above that, now you're getting into nice to haves. And I mean, these nicer haves are great. A good sleeping bag. I can't say it enough. If you have a really good sleeping bag, you probably don't even need to worry too much about the fire after you go to sleep, because a good sleeping bag will keep you warm throughout the night. Um, that's not always something that everyone has um, the advantage of getting right away. Cheaper sleeping bags aren't necessarily not as warm, and never let anyone tell you that they aren't. The thing is, they're generally going to be bulkier. And I've said it before, bulk is much more of an enemy to me than weight. Because I have a 70-liter pack and it seems to fill up a lot. It doesn't seem to be getting that much heavier on me, but it's always bulked up. It's always too full. And things like your sleeping bags really take up the majority of room in your pack. You can pick up a decent sleeping bag for $100. Unfortunately, and it'll get you through the night, almost any winter night. Unfortunately, you're probably not going to fit in your pack. Like, you can pick up some of the biggest, heaviest sleeping bags. They're extremely warm, extremely good to use, but their limitation is, of course, their bulk. So if you're doing a camping trip in the middle of the winter and you have a sleeping bag that you can barely get your arms around, well, that tends to be the only thing you're taking. So I see someone ready to monkey layer. And that's a word that works for a lot of this. So layer your clothing, layers on the ground for your insulation. Those are some big things here. Like my buddy Sean said the other day, he said, some people say it's too cold. What he says is you're dressed improperly, because the reality is once you've dressed for the weather you're in, you're not really going to get cold. And it was interesting. We had some decently low temperatures, but by the time we got into and working and walking, we were hot. Like, I was pulling I had my jacket undone. I had a vest on there. Both of that was undone. At various times I was taking my gloves off, just trying to not overheat. My biggest complaint actually was not ever that I was cold, is that I was hot. And I mean, that's a funny thing to say, I think, in the winter, but the reality is I took enough gear that as cold as I knew it was going to be, I would be able to be relatively warm. The problem was that gear is bulky. My snow pants are bulky. My snow jacket is bulky. My good mitts are bulky. My good hat is bulky. When I don't need that on, it's either got to be on me, hung up around camp, or in my pack. So if I'm walking, it's either on me or in my pack. So that was my biggest struggle, believe it or not, was wearing that gear or putting it in my pack. And since my pack was relatively full, yes, bivy sacks definitely would increase the warmth of a lot of sleeping bags. 100%. I haven't got a ton of uses out of a bivy sack, but things I've done with my hammock system, I've gotten a similar effect, even with as little as a screen. Anything you can put over and confine that space and reduce the wind and keep things from pulling, air out, definitely works. Do notice, and I have a really good story about this. I went one of the first times I remember winter camping without like adult supervision, and this comes with a caveat. I went camping with a friend of mine. He was older than I, and he had a son about my age. He said, "Why don't you take my son and take him winter camping? He really wants to try it." So I said, "Sure." He dropped me off in the woods. We went out, and we set up the little lean-to shelter. We had a nice long fire in front of it. It was set up great, and we each had a relatively big and heavy sleeping bag, and we had a backpack with some basic hand tools for making this shelter. In the middle of the night, my buddy comes in. It bothered him. I know it did. It really bothered him. We were out having fun. We were out there sitting at a fire, having a good time, and he wasn't part of it. So he showed up. He didn't have the greatest sleeping bag, but he did bring a plastic bag as a bivy bag. Now, a good bivy bag does breathe some. A plastic bag does not breathe any. And the next morning when we woke up, his sleeping bag was stiff. Like you could almost pick it up by one end and just have it stay straight out. Because it didn't breathe, he sweat overnight, and his sweat got into the insulation, and then it froze. And yes, Chris, your canoe pack is both massive and quite useful. I am a little jealous of it, and I am tempted to get one eventually. Thermal layer in my bag. So I went to Walmart last year and bought a couple of small, cheap sleeping bags. Like I think they were rated for 4.4 degrees, and they crushed down to about the size of a large grapefruit. And that's what I used as a liner. I think it was in my winter sleeping bag. And I guarantee you, had the stove gone out all night, I would not have froze. You can buy good thermal liners. I have a fleece one I like. Honestly, it's bulkier than my this lightweight sleeping bag. And it's dirt cheap. I bet you I paid no more than I did for my liners. But any of these things definitely add to your system. And the beauty is, if you do get hot with these layers, you can kind of open them up. And if you look at, say, the Canadian Forces sleeping bag system, it's exactly that. It's 2 down sleeping bags with a fleece type liner, and you can get the bivy oversack. And I think when you add all 4 of those together, they're rated for like -40. So you can basically go out in some of the coldest nights in the winter, set up in that system, and more or less sleep right out in the open and be fine. Throw that into a tent or a sheltered system, you can go even lower. You threw that into a snow hut or Quincy hut or whatever you want to call it, you would be definitely overpacked. Like you would definitely be opening up 1 or 2, or if not 3 of these layers, and just being there in the fleece, and the other 3 kind of laid over to you throughout the night. So these are all great things to think about. Like, what do you need? You need to know that you're going to be kind of warm. Yes. Yeah. Up here in Nova Scotia, Canada, here we can do sort of the same. There are definitely at least 1 to 2 months of the summer that I find anything more than a small sheet can be too warm sometimes. But as spring and fall comes on, that starts to change quite quickly here. Probably not quite as good as Australia. But I haven't convinced the wife to move to Australia yet. So snakes. If you guys could just control the snakes a bit better, I'll be moving down anytime. So we've mentioned the shelter. I've mentioned the shelters. We've talked about the fire. We've talked a bit about a wood stove. We've talked about a sleeping system, and we've talked a bit about clothing. All these things are great to survive. Bivy sacks, that goes into our sleep system. Here's how you make it really enjoyable, though. And I think this is hard to deny once you figured it out. Good food. Anytime you're camping, winter especially, take some good food. Food you're really going to enjoy. Food that you're looking forward to. I find that if I got I usually take for my first night, if nothing else, a nice steak. Chris also took a nice steak. Sean, sorry, I know you didn't take steak this time. You had one of those freeze-dried meals, which I think you enjoyed. But when I take food that I'm going to enjoy and I'm looking forward to, and the cooking of it and the whole process, it really kind of Yes, Chris. Asparagus. Yes, that would have been nice, wouldn't it? And we had it. It was just not reachable. When you have this food, like if you have something you're enjoying, like when I wake up in the morning, I had scrambled eggs and bacon. So I look forward to that. Like, and that really makes it enjoyable. I think if you've got a decent shelter, so you're decently comfortable, and you know your sleep system's going to be adequate to get you through the night, and you know your clothing is good enough that you're going to be safe. All this adds up, and in the food, that's what makes it from being an okay trip to a great trip. And at least for me, I always look forward to the meals. So take your time and really plan some good meals when you go. And I think that is going to be the secret for a lot of people who go out there and do winter camping and say, "Oh, I don't think I'm going to enjoy it." Once you get to doing that and enjoying those meals and knowing that, you've done something a little extra special out there, it just makes that whole experience so much better. So the other thing I want to talk a little bit about, and this is definitely something that I think needs to be brought up, and it's not necessarily winter camping per se, but it's safety. Um, we seen some pretty interesting things while we're out there. Uh, right now here in Nova Scotia, the ice is on a lot of the lakes, not all of them. It's thick enough in spots that it kind of supports your weight, but I wouldn't say trust it. I definitely take an axe before I went very far onto the ice and check it. I would definitely hit it with a stick or give it a good stamp from the edge and see what you're dealing with and keep testing it. Um, we actually seen evidence while we were out there of someone having fallen through the ice and getting probably quite wet from the evidence we seen before they climbed to the other side of a river. Now, we were actually quite worried about what had happened there. Since we weren't very far from where it happened and they knew we were kind of in the area, but had continued on in the other direction, we assumed that they were quite fine. And there was no evidence that this was to the contrary. And when we got out the next morning, we actually ran into these young fellows, and they were quite fine. But they did tell me that one of them had gotten quite wet and ended up spending quite a bit of that day drying off and warming up in a sleeping bag while his friend managed to do some exploring and have some fun. So take time and really plan your route and really make sure that you're prepared for the eventuality, because it doesn't take long for something to go really wrong, especially if you're soloing it. I don't say you shouldn't solo it. You'll never hear me say you should. Uh, Yes, Robert. This is the time of year when you get a lot of calls for people falling through the ice, and it's very true because we have been cooped up for a while, especially this last year. We've been cooped up, so when people see an opportunity to get out there, they're oftentimes pretty quick to get out there and go skating, or get out there and go skiing, or get out there and do all these fun things. Uh, yes. Um, so it does happen. People get out there and they push the limits and they don't expect it. Do realize, anyone who's not familiar with ice, is ice can be 4 inches thick in one spot and be literally millimeters thick only inches away. And it does change that drastically. Um, Yes, Robert. Yeah, wet foot and spending the whole day trying to dry it out. And that's exactly what happened to me and Robert. We were playing around the river, and that was warmer weather. That wasn't winter, and but it was colder than you wouldn't be swimming yet or anything that time of year. And he stepped into the river and got wet. And it took quite a while to dry out. In fact, coming back, my buddy Chris may have gotten his feet a little wet when he fell into a small creek. We were very close to his truck by that time, and we were on the way out. And fortunately, he was able to get dried off and quite comfortable. But honestly, that same situation had it happened early on in a trip, could very well have ended that trip. Uh, and that would have been okay because we'd all be safe, but it would be disappointing. Had this happened late in the evening, we would have been forced to probably stay where we are and try and dry out. I pushed it. I was on the other side of the river. Oh my, Chris. You know I'd never push you in. At least not without you knowing full well it was me. But, had something like that happen in the evening, just after dark, it might not be safe to go out. Now you're sort of stuck trying to dry this out at the fire. Had it happened on a multi-day trip, that actually could be quite dangerous. If you're any distance away and you don't have enough extra gear or way to properly dry it out, a wet foot can truly not only end a trip, but it can actually cause a lot of damage and risk to all involved. So it's very important to sort of really take care of yourself. And that's back to this whole safety thing. Really plan and be careful and make sure that you have what you need for the trip. I think we did quite well. And I don't want anyone to think that we didn't. We were plenty safe. In fact, I think at no point for this particular trip, as fun and as great as it was, we were only 30 minutes from the ability for extraction. So our gear, when you think about it, everything we had, we were more than adequately prepared for all possibilities. And we had failures. I had tried an experiment with a kid sled as a pulk sled, and it cracked. And then as we went further, it cracked more and more. And I think before we even made it to camp, the whole front end fell right off the thing. And we ended up walking that back to the truck later that day and carried the gear. And everything I had set up, I could carry anyways. So it wasn't a huge problem. It was a little bit of a disappointment, but I had half expected it to happen. But every time I make a trip, I do try to sort of experiment with things and figure out what works and what doesn't in a safe manner as possible. Like I said, the ability, knowing that I could still throw the pack on my back and carry what we had to, meant that I wasn't really taking a huge risk, but I was going to find whether it worked or not. And my suggestion is, if you are looking for a decent pulk sled, the little red ones from Walmart and Canadian Tire may not be ideal. The problem I have with them is the nose is a little bit down tilted and low to the ground. So every time you come down to little wows, the nose dragged in and sort of kicked an excessive amount of snow over my gear and put a lot of stress on the sled. Something with a more steep and abrupt angled front anyways would be better. Something that could take some drastic changes in elevation would be better for sure. So I will be looking at some new options for that system. But yeah, what do you need? You don't need a lot to go winter camping. You need to really think about what you're doing and make sure that you have your sleep system figured out. Once you figure it out, and it can be as simple as a wool blanket from Value Village, boughs on the ground, and a natural shelter. For that, probably not much more than a small saw and an axe and a handful of line, and you can build a pretty wicked little shelter and go camping. And honestly, you won't be out much more than, even if you include the price of the saw and the axe, you can probably do it for under $50, really. Like, surprisingly not far off. I used to lit up a car top luggage carrier as a sled. That's some strong plastic. I really wonder if they're all comparable, because I've seen some under that, like the Thule style ones that like they're asking $300 for them used, and then you can get like the cheap carry all or whatever their names are that they sell for hmm, yeah. I seen one in Costco a little while ago for $89, and I was tempted to buy it and I didn't. And if I go in now, I'll be surprised if I find one there. But if I do, I may be tempted to buy it for sure now. Hi, hey, uh, hey, Steve, from the UK. Um, yes, yeah, I've been looking at used. As some of you may be aware, I've recently procured a new vehicle, and I'm really planning on getting it equipped for more outdoor adventures. And with a family of five, three girls and my wife, plus a dog, space is always is a premium. So I'm looking at different car top options, whether it be baskets and boxes or a car top carrier. Also, like hitch mounted devices may be useful. Um, so I have been looking a lot on the used market around here, and it's surprising the prices used go anywhere from $20 for one with a small crack to I think one was asking over $300 for a used uh, one. So it is a huge range up here, and it's strange. Even in the province next to ours, I see a significant drop in those prices. So why Nova Scotia is so much more expensive, I don't know. Uh, but yeah, I'm not going to really push any particular product, but I gotta say, like I've tried almost all these methods that I've talked about. I've tried natural shelters, I've tried snow shelters, I've tried hammock systems, I've used tents, I've used hammock shelters, and all of them have worked very well for me, and really been enjoyable experiences. And I can't say that any one of them is one I would never do again, because honestly, every one of them I would do again. And in fact, I kind of look forward to doing each of them again. Cold camping in the winter isn't as bad as people make it out to be. And hot tenting, I think, is bit a bit faddish in some ways. I really enjoy it, and I'm going to continue doing it. But it's kind of a novelty. It really is. It does have its fun aspects and stuff, and I really do enjoy it. And I'm not knocking it by any, but it's not the be all and end all for all things. So if you really want to get out there and tank, and the only reason you can't do it is because you can't afford the $500 um, wood stove, then I'm going to tell you, you can definitely do it for quite a bit less. Just invest a little bit of that money into your sleep system, and then I mean, almost any tent can be used in the winter. Yeah, double that actually makes a lot of sense. Dead air is one of the best insulators, and just two walls with a few inches of space in between them would be a great insulation. For sure, that would definitely be a great method. The other thing, just if you only have the one, just putting debris on top of a tarp makes a huge difference. Moss, boughs, uh, grass, and if it's the lighter stuff like duffish grass, just a few things of never done a cold winter overnight. I can't wait. Are you Scott M? Are you local to Nova Scotia, or are you further north? Where are you? Do you mind? Yeah. Um, Cold camping is actually cold weather camping is a lot of fun, and it's Pennsylvania. Oh, you should have fun out there. Yeah, you should have a decent winter cold camp capability. Um, no, it is a lot of fun. It's a great experience. I highly encourage anyone that can to get out and try it. It does change things a lot. Um, because it's different. It's not something everyone does, but you don't have to worry about the bugs and stuff. You don't have to worry about a lot of stuff you normally do, and I think it brings a huge pride to anyone who ever gets the opportunity to do it. Once you do it, and you realize that like 90% of the population probably will never actually bother, but you've done it, and now you know like it's something you can do. And in fact, it's not only can you do it and survive, but it's actually more enjoyable than you expected. And I think as you do it, the challenge then becomes not can I do it and survive, but how much more comfortable can I be, or how long can I go, and how, you know, uh, how is it going to be so much better each time? Um, finding some good people to go with, though, I gotta say, like having a couple of good guys to go camping with, like I did last weekend, and having like chats and laughing and carrying on. It's and tea. I love tea when I'm camping. I don't do coffee, and in fact, I don't even do much hot chocolate anymore because I don't do the sugars. Um, but any hot drink really does make it. And then one of the good tricks that a lot of people don't realize, to make sure you stay warm throughout the night, is have that good hot drink before you go to bed, and have a good meal. Eating a good meal before you go to bed means you have a full stomach, which means your stomach is actually digesting food, which produces a lot of heat, and you're going to sleep a lot warmer if you go to bed with a full stomach. Um, the other trick is, hot apple cider. That is enjoyable. I have done that, and it is definitely a great thing to do. Um, and I'll definitely cheat on my diet for that. Uh, but yeah, a good meal, a good warm drink before you go to bed. When you do need to pee, get up and pee. Don't hold on to it. They say that robs your body of heat, and it really you're just making yourself uncomfortable because you're just sitting there. You won't sleep if you really need to pee, so you're just going to sit there and think how horrible it is. Once you get up and get it done and over with, it's great because you can get back in bed. You can stay there till you're ready to actually get up. What are other things? Um, Hand warmers. uh, I take I picked up some at Princess Otto's, a local place here. I'm sure different places around you can get these, but they're hand warmers, but they're significantly bigger. I didn't have to use them last trip, but we had them. Both me and Chris had one just sitting by our respective sleeping systems. And the theory was if you get cold, you open one up and you toss it where you get cold. So just toss that into, say, the foot of your sleeping bag, and it adds quite a lot of warmth. The other thing is, if you do happen to get wet, cold, or miserable, if you have a nice hand warmer, you can kind of put that where those wet, cold areas are and kind of warm them up and keep yourself going. And some of these things, like the ones I have, I think they're rated for 14 hours, and I've used them in the past, and I swear they do that at least. I think it depends on how much oxygen they're letting air. So if you put it in a kind of a sealed area, they'll last a lot longer, but won't be able to get it as hot. And if you put them in an area where they're really exposed to a lot of air, they burn a little faster. Exactly, Scott. They are air activated. So if your boot is a relatively sealed boot, which very well is, if it wants to be waterproof, it's basically airproof. They will stop producing heat, and as soon as they get re-exposed to air, they'll heat again. The nice thing is sleeping bag systems are generally not airtight. They're just air moves through them very slowly. So that's a thing. The other thing that I'm going to just throw out there, and I mean, I realized that even by myself, I'm going for close to an hour already. Look at option, put in a cooler to keep things from freezing. I hadn't really thought of that. Yeah, in the winter, that is a real thing. Like the beauty of winter camping is you don't have to worry about keeping things cool. So I'm more prone to taking like meats and stuff like that I worry about in the summer. But in the winter, you actually do want to not have things freeze because cooking a frozen steak is so much more difficult than cooking a thawed steak. So yeah, you could definitely use it for controlling uh, your 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 food and stuff. Um, Take a dry set of clothing for sleeping at night. I always take, like, say, two sets of thermals, one I'm wearing and one I have put aside for the overnight. And then I always have at least one. And in fact, it's right here. I haven't had a chance to put it away, but I just had one bag with some spare clothing. So I had a small wool, an actual wool sweater. I'm always looking for a better wool sweater. This one I was fortunate, a coworker, actually, I mentioned I was looking for one. And she was in Value Village or one of those type stores, and she found one that was the size I said. She got it for me. Thin pair of nylon style pants on top of my night thermals. That would have got me good through the day if the rest of my clothing had gotten wet, and obviously underwear and socks, things like that. So just a full change of clothing in a nice dry bag, because if something does happen, it's always possible that you do get wet. It's always great to have a dry option of clothing. Like I said, Chris, you did get wet, but you had a full set of dry clothing waiting. So as soon as we got back to the truck, you switched into the dry clothing. And I mean, that makes a world of difference. You can't stay wet for any length of time. You have to judge that really well for your area. If it's freezing cold and you get wet, you need to deal with that instantly. If it's still fairly warm and you're working, you can potentially stay wet for a while. Just don't get to the point where you're actually cold. Once you realize you're cold and it's affecting you, you definitely have to deal with that. Don't allow yourselves to get cold, especially if you don't have an immediate way to heat up really quickly. So if you do have a fire going and you get yourself cold, it's not a big deal. You can get to the fire. But if you have to get the fire started, or if you have to travel a ways to get to it, you really want to start dealing with that right away. But really, when you add all these things up, I mean, summer camping has its own risks and stuff, and heat exhaustion is a real one. How do you deal with that? You would go potentially swimming if you can, but that's not always an option. So too much heat is just as dangerous as too cold, in my opinion. White thin glove liners to keep the chill off your hands while you're cooking and such. Yes. Believe it or not, too, like the nitrile or latex style gloves, throw one of those on over the top of one of those, and you would be surprised. Sort of like was mentioned up above about layering and liners for your sleeping bag or the bivy blanket. Anything to stop the wind, and then an insulating layer underneath that can really do a lot of good. This caveat there is, if it can't breathe, eventually that liner will get damp, and that can start to be an issue. There is something, and we've talked about this before, and I can't remember the proper wording for it, but there is a vapor barrier, I think is the word. If you can use a vapor barrier in a correct method, it actually really enhances your system. 3 pairs of dollar store synthetic gloves. Yeah, I had 4 pairs of gloves, different gloves. I had a pair of leather gloves. I had a thin pair of like winter gloves, a thick pair that I was wearing, and I had a pair of work gloves. So I had options because my hands are what tends to get the wettest. But as I was saying, yeah, gloves are something to make sure you, the vapor barrier method for staying warm is to prevent you from basically expelling too much heat from your body. So if you sleep with say a plastic bag, you actually put it next to your skin. It's cold and clammy, but you put it next to your skin and then put something like a warm over the top of that, you'll actually be a lot warmer. You wouldn't want to do it the other way. Put that vapor barrier on the outside necessarily, because that moisture gets trapped. And the problem is when it gets trapped into that air layer, the outside starts to freeze. And then as it freezes, it just becomes like a conduit for that cold. It works its way in and will stop the insulating property. So if you wear those latex gloves on the inside and put the wool gloves on the outside, you'll actually technically be a little bit warmer than you would expect, because the breeze will never get right to your hand, and the vapor, the moisture on your skin won't dry off, and that's what really causes that cooling in the summer, is as your skin gets warm, and then as it dries, it actually takes heat from your skin to evaporate. That sort of prevents that method. It's definitely a method to look into, and don't expect that I'm going to fully properly explain it, because I probably wouldn't. Although I think I understand it well, wouldn't necessarily convey all the proper things to it. So it's a method that can be used, and it's just not necessarily the most comfortable method. So just do be aware of that. But if you're in an emergency, it is a system that can work. So I think I covered a lot of subjects here. I'd rather be wet, clammy, and sweaty than get down my bag set. My down bag with sweat. Yes. Yeah, 100%. Down when it's wet is basically useless. So yes, that wet, clammy, and sweaty, and keeping your down bag dry is definitely a major issue. If any of you guys have ever seen a down sleeping bag when it's actually gotten wet, it'll actually almost, I think, double in weight, if not more, and can take days to dry out. Oh yes, the hot water bottle in your Nige bottle. Yeah, hot water, definitely similar to the hand warmer system I mentioned. Anything you can throw in. Put it on your feet is great. Under your armpits, or in around your groin, near I think it's the vagus vein or whatever. Anywhere there will actually change the heat. It'll transfer it to your body a lot quicker and can really warm you up quickly. So that's a great method. There's a ton of things to learn. I mean, winter camping is a great experience, and a ton of stuff you can learn for sure. And it's a subject that I could talk for hours on. Just check and see if they. Yeah. Okay. So I've rambled for about an hour. I hope you guys found this somewhat entertaining. I hope you guys will enjoy or join us next week. Next week, I believe, is our 100th episode. So this is 99 episodes we've done. Me and Robert are very proud of this. This is we haven't really missed a week yet. We had a couple that we did pretty shortened, but we really do enjoy doing this. And I know Robert chimed in as much as he can. And I look forward to him joining us next week. But it's great to see you guys here. And next week, it is a big week for us. I don't really know what's happening yet. We're still looking at some things, but I hope to see you guys then. In the meantime, I'd love to hear that you guys are getting out there and enjoying it. It's always enjoyable to get out and do it. Just do it safely. We want to hear about your adventures from you, not from someone else, because it's never quite as good. So get out there, enjoy yourselves, have fun. We are looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.